Now George is going to talk about the original owners of the Foundry.
Kellogg Foundry was established in 1943, and Jack Granger and George Shantz were the principal stockholders, and Norman Johns, Betty's father, was one of the stockholders. And they hired me while we were living in Ypsilanti, and Betty was still going to school. She was in her senior year, and in 1945 she got a senior degree, and the Foundry, as I was saying, I started an accounting office and so forth. And when Betty graduated, they offered me a full-time job. I was doing it part-time before that while she was going to school. And Betty graduated, so we left Ypsilanti. Couldn't find a place to live in Ipsy, so I had to move to Toledo and live with Betty's folks until we could find a place to live in Homer. In the meanwhile, I would commute from Homer to Ypsilanti, from Toledo to Homer by way of bus or hitchhiking. Did that for a few years. And after a few years, we did find a place to live in Homer, which is at the main funeral home on the third floor. So we had our own apartment for the first time since we'd been first married. And from there, we started our life as a married couple in our own place in Homer, Michigan. And in 1947, our little boy, George J. Petrolin, was born. And from then on, there was all Homer and growth changes that happened over many, many years.
And who were the original owners of the Calhoun Foundry?
The Calhoun Foundry was founded by Jack Granger and George Shantz, and Betty's father had an interest in it. And they didn't have anybody to take care of their books. While I was working in Ypsilanti, Betty was at school. And they lived in Homer and Ypsilanti, and the plant was in Homer. And Jack, the president, didn't have anybody in the office for the Foundry in Homer, and he'd bring the books back to Ypsilanti, where he lived and communicated weekends for a few years.
And then George, how did moving ahead? How did you gain a new position at the Foundry as the three owners started getting older?
Well, when they offered me the job to help set the office up, they didn't have any office personnel or office managers, and Jack Granger and George Shantz were too busy in the operations of the Foundry, so they needed me, and I could do it part-time while I lived in Ypsilanti and help get it organized. And from there, being fortunate that prosperity and growth of the Foundry, as it grew up, it needed more personnel. I finally wound up coming in as the office manager of the Foundry. And the Foundry at that time, in 43 and 44, was just scratching the bottom of business, and progressively they kept improving with their personnel that they did have. And we had a great time in the growth from scratch with the Foundry until we eventually became one of the most modernized little foundries in the United States, recognized with all the latest developments in foundry technology. And in the process of doing that, we developed an interesting connection with Professor Sigerfus of Michigan State University. He joined the Foundry group in Jackson, and I made it a point to sit next to him at all the meetings and become very thoroughly recognized and a disciple of Charlie Sigerfus as professorship. And with that progress, I gleaned a lot of how to develop a personnel and some managerial personnel to help our foundry as we were progressively growing more successful and needed more learned personal people. And this was achieved with the growth of learning how to manage with good people from Charlie Sigafus.
And then at some point you were using the quick annealing process in Jackson. Tell how that evolved.
Well, the foundry was good. We were manufacturing foundry castings that had to be annealed. We developed a partnership, not a partnership, but a connection with quick heat and heat treating in Jackson. Their sole function was to heat treat castings from various other foundries. And and we were one of the principal customers, and as we kept growing, we needed more heat treating, and we learned that we should develop our own, which we did, using the personnel that we hired from Quick Industry, Bob Dalton. And Bob Dalton was a neophyte engineer who was really successful in helping us organize our heat treating development, where we could do California's annealing successfully and economically with Bob Dalton's supervision and experience.
So you brought heat treating capability, or you built that here in Homer, and with Bob Dalton as the principal engineer in charge of that.
Right.
But it was still the Quick firm that was here.
Well, our firm, the foundry needed heat treating, and we got into a relationship with Quick Heat Treating, but the growth grew we were growing so fast that we needed our own facilities, so we developed our own heat treating and hired one of the supervisors from Quick Heat Treating, so we created our own heat treating department in Homer with Bob Dalton as our supervisor, and which ran successfully, and we kept increasing and enlarging until it almost came an independent plant industry.
And then finally you bought them out, you became your own separate entity in 1994.
Well, with Bob Dalton just joined in our forces, we became our own individualized foundry to capitalize our own heat treating, and he spearheaded the development of the heat treating, which ran successfully, and we enlarged it, and we're very successful in increasing our volume and doing it economically so it could be competitive.
And how about going back to the foundry? There was one person who you developed over time to become the supervisor of the foundry, and that was Mr. Hackworth?
Well, when we were growing, our foundry was just basically one type of foundry, but then we developed specialized heat treating, not heat treating, but molding, core baking, and cleaning. And we had a supervisor, Dick Wade, who managed the foundry portion. Clayton had the maintenance department, because in order to make progress, you have to have good equipment, and Clayton was our leader in developing those techniques. And as we grew, the job became more demanding. Dick Wade left us, and we engineered to move Clayton from maintenance into the foundry division. And by his being a very conscientious individual, he learned the basics of Foundry technologies and helped develop the Foundry end of it after Dick Wade left. And then it became more progressive and then it developed more Foundry techniques in the Foundry and cleaning room and the operation. And with Clayton, who came through the betas, we developed all these new technologies and developed a successful operation with good supervision and the various areas of responsibility.
And what about recent years in the Foundry and in the heat treat? How did the management evolve there?
Well, it's interesting. In the Foundry, and I was always making it a point to go where you could see some leaderships at all these meetings, and as a result, I developed a good not a clientele, but a relationship with Foundry operators from foreign countries and so forth. And in fact, at one time, we were the only American Foundry that joined the Foreign Foundry Association in Europe, in which it developed our stature and our technique to be a modernized foundry that could be able to compete based on a competition of any kind, foreign or local. Through the associations that we made through our meetings with the association and the help of Charlie Sigerfus, who was an international known Foundry person, and he became part of Callan Foundry. And as a result, we had a good clientele and following in Europe because of Charlie Sigerfus.
And then when did George Jr. Take over control of the Foundry, and Tom and Ron of the heat treat?
Well, of course, in our growth at the Foundry, we developed a need for heat treaters. We developed a heat treating outfit, and we had the young Tom join the heat treat while we were just in its infancy, helping to work and develop and be able to stay with the increased production as we are progressively improving. And in turn with Tom in the heat treat, and then Ron joined us for us to help assist Tom. And then between the two, we made a very successful Callan heat treating company. And in the meanwhile, George developed his techniques with the Foundry and managed to run the Callan Foundry business.
All right, well, let's pause right there and then we'll get back to the story.
Okay.